So I want to give you a story to open this, to illustrate. Am I walking out of your frame of vision, Linda? I'll try to go over here so you can't see me. No, turn.
Here.
Just kidding. She gives me a hard time.
Oh, really?
She was giving me a hard time yesterday because my shirt had a rip in it. So now I'm going to give her a hard time. Stories. So I want to try to balance my teaching between Western and Eastern modes. So in a story, if I'm going to teach you about storytelling, importance of storytelling, I'll tell you at least partly in a story. So this is a story, a true story of a young man named Sammy, who is Turkish. Actually, they say Sammy because they don't pronounce the hard H like they're supposed to. They don't know how to pronounce the Arabic very well. But this young man was in Istanbul. He was a tourism student, probably around 2004 or 2005. I was traveling through Istanbul, visiting some friends. And I had come in, I think I flew into Istanbul, and I took if anybody's been to Istanbul, the sea taxi from the airport to the Asian side. And I was waiting there on the Asian side at the sea taxi port, which is also a bus stop in Eminönü, or Kadıköy. And I was waiting there for my friends. And my friends were delayed or late or something, and I was sitting there waiting with my backpack. And here comes a young man, and for some reason he recognized me as a foreigner, or maybe because I was talking on the phone or something like that. But he started talking to me, and he wanted to basically practice his English. He was a tourism student. And so his English wasn't amazing, but it was passable. You know, Turks are like a lot of big countries. They don't learn foreign languages as much as the little countries. But his English wasn't super good, but it was communication was possible. So we were talking, and he was quite an interesting guy. And then suddenly my friends came, and I said, "Okay, well, bye, Sammy." And thankfully, my friends picked up on the Holy Spirit and said, "No, why do we have to say goodbye?" They said, "Well, come with us. We're going to have dinner." So we went together to their house, and we had dinner, and we were talking, and they were Turkish believers with one American missionary who was very good in Turkish. And so mostly the conversation was in Turkish and a little bit in English. And so I don't speak Turkish, so I'm kind of only partially included, which is fine. So things were going great. And we were having such a good time. They said, "Hey, Sammy, why don't you stay the night with us in our apartment?" So I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, so he put one next to mine, and we went to sleep. And the next day was Sunday, and we were going to a Turkish church in that part of the city. And he was like really surprised. You know, the night before they said, "Okay, tomorrow we're going to our church." He said, "Oh, your church? Are there churches in Turkey? Are you Armenians? What's going on?" So he was, surprised. He didn't know about it. So he was curious. So we went to church, and it was a room about this size, but it was on the bottom floor of a multi-story concrete building, and so there were big pillars, the kind in the middle of the room. And so there were plastic chairs in between the pillars, and there wasn't a center aisle. There's only aisles on the sides. It's kind of cramped, and the room was full. And so when we filed into one of the rows, there was, Sammy was here, a bunch of his friends were here, our friends, and then there was a pillar, and I was on this side. So I was kind of separated a little bit from the group, and I don't really understand Turkish, and the preaching was in Turkish. And so I'm sitting there, and before I know it, everybody stands up. Everyone stands up. I don't know what's going on. People start filing up to the front. I realize, oh, communion. But Sammy's far away from me, so I was going to, maybe try to pull him aside or something. But he didn't know, so he just got up with everybody else and came to the front. just as he saw everyone else doing, to take the bread and the wine. And the pastor didn't recognize him, so the pastor said to him in Turkish, "Are you a Christian?" He said, "No, I'm a Muslim." He said, "I'm sorry, you can't take communion." Well, Sammy was embarrassed. Yeah. And he was, lost face. And so the mood changed. When we were walking away from the church, all of a sudden, every conversation before that was very friendly, very, we're all getting along. And now it's like, how come you Christians are so exclusive? I'm open-minded. I came to your church, but you excluded me. And they were talking. And at first, the conversation, for my sake, was in English. And then after a little while, they were arguing heatedly in Turkish. And I have no idea what's going on. So I'm walking with them. And I just started praying, "Lord, help this situation get resolved." And I was just in prayer and didn't know what to say. I was thinking, "Lord, give me something to say." So we reached my friend's apartment, and without going upstairs to their apartment, he was ready to say goodbye. And I was kind of desperate at this point, and just saying, "Lord, give me something. I don't know really what to say here." I mean, I could look at the passages about, don't take the communion in an unworthy manner. And they were, I'm sure, quoting them that. I picked up on that they were quoting those scriptures. And so, without knowing exactly what I was going to say, I told him, Sammy, before you go, we've had such a good time together before now. Please, I want to ask you, come upstairs with us, and I have something very important to share with you before you go." And I had no idea what it was. So we're going up the stairs. I'm saying, "God, help me." I opened my Bible. I don't remember if it was opened at random or if this thing just popped to my head, and right to a passage which, on the face of it, has no logical connection with the issue of communion. It would not be in the top 10 or 20 verses or 100 verses that you would think about when it comes to communion. But from a poetical, symbolic, storytelling perspective, I didn't even realize this when I began to read the passage, but God opened my eyes to what He was giving me for Sammy while I was in the middle of teaching it. And it was a really fun experience. It was terrifying and fun. So the story is in the book of, hold on a second. I think it's in the book of 2 Samuel, but I forgot to look this up beforehand. I think it's in the book of 2 Samuel. Yes, 2 Samuel 23, verse 13. 3 of the 30 chief men went down and came about harvest time to David at the cave of Adullam, when a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then at Bethlehem. So I said, okay, stop. Let me explain the scene to you. David is the king. God has anointed him to be king from long before. But at this moment, he is not even king over his own village. His own village, Bethlehem, he was just a farm boy. He was a humble man, but he has warriors that are loyal to him. But his own town, Bethlehem, where he was from, was in enemy hands. And this stung him, this hurt him in his heart. And so he said, longingly, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of the gate of Bethlehem." Okay? "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of the gate of Bethlehem." Have you ever gone somewhere else and drunk the water and said, it doesn't taste like the water back home, it tastes bad? If you live in the Middle East, at least in Lebanon and Palestine, Israel, there are a lot of springs in the mountains. And sometimes springs have a unique taste because of the minerals in the ground. And so you can have this memory of a place by drinking the water. And he's feeling the sting, and he wants water from his hometown. So what happens? His men loved him so much, and they were loyal to him, that his wish was their command. You know that phrase, your wish is my command. That comes from the Arabian Nights, actually. And so, in order to please him, it says, then the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate. Or literally in Hebrew, the well, the gate, Bethlehem, which implies of. And carried it and brought it to David. So can you picture this scene? These men like draw their swords, they break through enemy lines, and they're like, hold on. Protect me, I'm drawing water. Okay, let's go. We got the water, let's go. Pour it into, whatever container they have. Pour it into the container. All right, let's go. And then they go for their commander. And then they give it to him. And what does he do? He would not drink of it. He poured it out to the Lord and said, far be it from me, O Lord, that I shall drink this. Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. So I read that story. I said, Sammy, did you understand this story? What happened? Why did David refuse to drink that water? Wouldn't it? His men wanted to honor him. They wanted to please him. He was their commander, and they would die for him. They would die even just for a wish that he would have to drink this water. And they demonstrated that with their actions. So wouldn't he honor them by drinking that water? Why did he pour it out? Doesn't that seem, if the story was foolish up until then, that those men risked their lives for something so silly as that water instead of this water, didn't it just get more ridiculous? He dumped it out on the ground. Why did he do that? And he said, well, because, anybody want to answer? Why? Why did he dump it out?
It's like they made the water too special to drink.
Yeah, well,
sacred.
Yeah, because if he drank that water, if they had been hurt doing that, it's like it's their life that he's drinking. Their blood would be on his head. He would have been responsible for their death had they been killed in that raid, right? So he doesn't want to encourage that. And he can refuse. But what did he say? What did he say? What did he say? Was it water?
Blood.
He said, it's blood. It's blood. I said, Sammy, do you drink blood? No. Why don't you drink blood? Haram. Blood. So I said, look, David refused to drink it because it was blood. Was it really blood? Was it? No, it was water. But why? It represented blood, right? I said, Sammy, do you know that wine that they were going to give you, that's blood? I said, do you want to drink blood? He said, no. I said, so you should thank him that he didn't give you that wine. He said, oh, okay.
But you drink it.
But why do you drink it? I said, okay. Because our master, who we would die for, he commanded us to drink it. And instead of us dying for him, he died for us. So in respecting him and what he did, we have to be obedient to him. I said, Sammy, I pray that one day you will know that you are covered, that you are okay to drink that blood, because that's our salvation. And he said, "Oh, I understand. Thank you." And that was it. He stayed with us that night. He stayed with us the next day, and then he had school. The next day he had school. And so he left. But they stayed in touch. I went to Lebanon. 2 weeks later, 2 Sundays later, exactly 2 weeks, on Sunday, I got an email from my friends in Turkey. They said, "Sammy came to church with us last week. He came to church with us this week, and there was communion." And he stood up. When they announced the communion, he said, "I have something to announce." He came to the front. He said, "I am a sinner. I want the blood of Jesus to wash away my sin. And I want to take communion." And he took communion. The explanation that I gave Sammy was not logical. I don't think it was logical. It was a story. It was a symbol. It was symbolism. And I didn't have some wisdom or some plan to do this. It was really a gift from God for Sammy in that moment. And when I was even reading it, because I was at the time immersing myself in the poetry of the Eastern Church, I understood that story that God put in front of me enough to explain it to him. And since then, I've found many other things in that story in contemplating on it. Who is the well, the gate of Bethlehem? Come on. Let me give you a hint for Christians, okay? From Sunday school, we learned the answer is always Jesus. Who is the answer? Jesus. Okay, thank you. Who is the well of the gate of Bethlehem?
Jesus.
Yeah. Who is the well?
Jesus.
Who is the gate?
Jesus.
Thank you. Good job. Candy, let me see. So this is a symbol. I mean, do you think this is a coincidence that David was longing for this water of Bethlehem? Or do you think God intended that for some edification for us? In a way, as a prophecy of Jesus, that David himself longed for the well, the water of the well, of the gate of Bethlehem. This is, I'm telling you, I believe, inspired. Traditional exegesis would tell you, consider the intent of the biblically inspired author, right? So, was the intent of Samuel, the prophet, to point out that David was longing for Jesus messianically? Probably not. He probably didn't understand that. But who's the inspirer? God. You have to consider the intent of the inspirer, not just the inspired author. So that's where I have a little bit of an asterisk on the kind of traditional Western logic of exegesis. Let me go on that tangent just a little bit more, because this subject comes up a lot with one of my pastors. I have 3 pastors. One of them is very, thank God for him, he's careful, he's doctrinally he's a doctrine guy. So he doesn't like this kind of thing. It makes him uncomfortable. So I pointed out to him one time, you know who I'm talking about, Don? Chase. Yeah, Pastor Chase. Actually, so the priest, Caiaphas, he was a biblically inspired author. He said, and the Bible tells us, because of his office as a high priest and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, that he said, it's better for one man to die than the entire people should suffer or perish. What was his intent? Kill Jesus so he's not a problem for us. In this case, the intent of the inspirer of Scripture is exactly opposite of the intent of the inspired biblical author, and yet God still used that statement in almost the reverse, the exact statement is still inspired. It's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to suffer. Therefore, Jesus must die. But instead of in commanding Jesus' death, it's allowing Jesus' death to serve as redemption for many. So anyway, so this story, this is how I'm trying to point out that you can tell truth in story. And it's much more powerful. So for many years in the Middle East and in Africa, the only form of political subversion or political commentary is through art, and specifically through music and lyrics of songs. And you can sing to an Arab something, or you can recite in a poem to an Arab something that if you spoke it to him directly, he would kill you. This is an old secret. When I was with a team in Beirut, we used to go out on the public places along the seafront where all kinds of people were, and we wanted to do street evangelism. And street evangelism in Beirut is sensitive. It's not, well, there have been people killed for sharing the gospel in Lebanon in the past few decades, including people on our team. My friend Jamil, in my grandfather's house, was killed, targeted. But it's not as closed as other countries, right? But it's sensitive. So our thought is, how are we going to share the gospel directly without being in the middle of a enormous battle all the time? I mean, spiritual battle, yes, but how can we filter out the people who are not interested spiritually and only speak to those who are interested? At the same time, the Bible talks about cast your nets wide. Many are called, few are chosen. So how do we do this? Because relational evangelism, look, I'm not actually a very friendly person. I'm really not. I like conflict. I'm quite direct. I don't have time to be friends with everybody. Neither do you, even if you want to. I don't want to. There's some people I'm not interested in being their friend. I used to be different, but now I've become more judgmental. I don't want to waste my time. But how do I want to reach, even if I could be friends with everybody, all day long, just be friendly with, every single person, pack as many friendships into my life as possible. How am I going to reach the people of even one city? I can't do it. I can't remember that many names. How am I going to do this? Many are called, few are chosen. I don't want to, there's people I've argued with or tried to sincerely answer their questions for months, weeks, and they never get anywhere. How am I going to do this? Well, we were wrestling with these issues, but we didn't have an answer. But what we started to do is we started to tell stories. And what we discovered was that telling stories and worshiping, so we would worship, playing music on the street, and these were our nets. The little fish, they go through. The big fish, they get stuck. And this net allows you to filter a whole lot of water and catch the big ones. Do you get what I'm saying? If you have the right kind of net, you can call many and choose the few that are ready, that are ripe. And stories are one of those ways. Because we would see this over and over again. People would walk by and they would hear a story about a shepherd. And 90% of people would hear us telling this story and they walk by. And 10% of people, something catches them and they have to listen. And some of them, when they listen, it touches something deeper and they stay and they ask questions. So it functions as a net. The great thing also, when you just tell a story, people who like to argue, you can't argue with a story. Well, why did the guy have to do this? Why couldn't he have done that? It's kind of like, come on, guy. It's just a story. But it's not just a story. So it's this kind of level of in-between. And so people who want to argue, they don't have anything to grab. You can let go of the story quickly. Or somebody will come up to us in the middle of telling a story, or they'll in a break between stories, and they'll say, this is what I believe, and this is what is right, and this is what is wrong, and this is the politics, and this is the religion. And what we learn to do is just say, do you think so? Okay. Tell me this. What do you think of this? Tell your story. Forget anything that he just said and just tell a story. More often than not, he wanders away. Or he forgets what he was so mad about. All the politics and religion stuff that he wants. And it gets to something true and basic and symbolic of things to come and things that are above. And so stories. Once we had a little boy. There was a little boy who used to come all the time. His parents were selling coffee with a little cart. And they would have him with them. The father was selling coffee. And he would be with his father, but he was bored to death because it's just sitting there. Every time he would see us, he would run to us and he would bring us little cups of coffee from his dad, and we would give him ice cream and give him hugs and talk to him and tell him these stories. And once a guy came up to us in the middle of telling stories, and he came to us and he raised his finger at us and he said, I know what you're trying to do. This is forbidden. This is not right here. You need to... And the little boy came and stood in front of him and he said, you are from Satan. Go away. And you know what the guy did? He went away. You know what's cool about that? We rejoiced that day because I was thinking, how am I going to respond? I don't want to, do I fight him back? No, we have a right to be here. I'm a Lebanese. You're a Lebanese. You can say whatever you want. I can say whatever I want. Or do I say, okay, we'll go. How am I going to deal with this? You know what happened to Jesus? When the Pharisees, wanted to get him in trouble, the crowds, they get away. This is our teacher. Go away. We don't want you. And that filled us with joy because that's what they did to Jesus. The crowds, they loved him. And so these stories were able to connect us to them. And I want to touch on some of those stories. But stories help you to avoid arguments. They help you to avoid fruitless discussions, because I believe that there's a correlation between people who hear allegorical stories and are interested and those who have a spiritual hunger. I think it's correlated. And maybe if it's not 100% correlated, maybe there's some very serious, very logical people that have very sincere desire to know about Jesus. I'm sorry for them if they came across me and I didn't tell them about Jesus in a way that they understood. But I had more than enough to deal with just dealing with those who stayed to listen to the stories. In a 2-week period, we had 12 young men come to Christ on just telling stories on the street every night. Stories. Stories show wisdom. They stop arguments. They filter out people who have bad motives, I think. And then, after we started seeing a lot of fruit from this kind of ministry, we got rebuked. We were like, hey, look at this technique that we discovered. And then one day we got rebuked because we were like, wait a minute. This is just what Jesus did. We should have been doing this not because we didn't know what else to do. We should have been doing this because this is Jesus' example. This is what Jesus said. In Matthew 13 it says, all these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. Wow. So This is the model of Jesus, storytelling. I mean, he was a storyteller. He was a poet, storyteller. And if you look at his stories carefully, you see incredible structure. I don't really have time for that study, but if you're interested in the structure, the poetic and narrative structure of Jesus' parables, look for books by a theologian named Dr. Kenneth Bailey Jr. He grew up in the Middle East and Cyprus, and he spent his whole career as a theologian in those places, and he was immersed in Eastern thought. He read the old books from the monasteries that nobody was reading anymore. He interviewed the old people from the villages that still spoke Aramaic. He talked to the farmers about what is their season like. And he can unpack the parables in a way I've never seen anyone else do. You know, like the parable of the fig tree? It's kind of confusing. Why did Jesus curse this fig tree? It says right there it wasn't the season for figs. What kind of a mean dude is... Well, it's because you don't understand how farming works in the Middle East and how fig trees grow. If you understood, you'd know the answer to that parable. If you want to know, ask me later. It's simple. It's like everybody's all up in theological knots because they don't know how a fig tree grows in the Middle East. It's so simple. It's just farmer knowledge, right? But, so if you want to look at these structures, he also unpacks on a very literary level. Why are parables called parables? Because they're parabolic. They have an arc. They start and they end. So it goes A, B, C, D, C, B, A. And where do you find the climax, the most important part of the parable? It's not at the beginning and the end. In America, we start with thesis statement, then we do supporting paragraph A, supporting paragraph B, conclusion. Where's the important stuff? Supporting paragraph, thesis statement, conclusion. That's the important stuff. This is supporting material. In the Middle East, it's the opposite. All of this builds up to the important stuff, and then it builds back down and back out. The important stuff is in the middle, at the arc of the parabola. And so if you look at some of these, even a very simple example, the shortest parable, Paul says, this parable is true, physician, heal thyself. Is that a parable? Yeah, it is. A, physician. Heal, B, thyself, A, physician, thyself. Okay, it's a parabolic structure. Ken Bailey shows you how the Bible's parables have that arc. But anyway, in Sunday school, I was taught that the reason that Jesus spoke in parables was because, anybody want to answer that? Finish my thought for me?
You wanted to hide the truth.
That's not what I was taught.
That's what he said.
I know, but you're jumping the gun. You're reading my notes. What? To help people understand. That's what I was taught. Well, these are simple people. They're farmers. They're not educated. And so that's why Jesus spoke to them about things they understood, sheep and stuff like that, because they're dumb people. Well, that's not what Jesus said. As you pointed out, Jesus said, they asked him, why do you speak in parables? He said, basically, to hide the truth, like what you just said. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. To you it has been given the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. The one who has, more will be given from him. But the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. For generations, people have read this verse in terms of human wealth. Whoever has, them that's got will get. Them that's not will lose. But this is about spiritual knowledge. It may also be about human wealth. But certainly it's about spiritual knowledge. Those who have a spiritual hunger, they will get more. But those who are spiritually in starvation, they're going to starve. So this is why the parables exist to filter. those who have ears to hear from those who don't have ears to hear. Jesus always said, let him who has ears to hear, let him hear. In other words, he's inviting you to read between the lines. He's saying, I'm not going to state it plainly. Why? Because we don't cast pearls before swine. This stuff is, so how many people have had a Muslim ask them, where did Jesus ever say, I am God? How many people? Okay, maybe most of you haven't talked to many Muslims. Have you talked to Muslims?
Women, they don't.
Yeah, well, people who like to argue, they'll often say, where did Jesus ever say in the Bible, I am God? Worship me. When did he say that? You know what? He didn't say it as directly as that because he is God. He knows what he's doing. He's not trying to beat you up. He wants you to find him. He's not going to twist your arm and say, you worship me, I am God. He's going to say, read between the lines and decide for yourself, who are you going to serve? Because I want those who want me. So this is how parables can function. Let's look a little bit more of Jesus' style. Remember yesterday I was talking about controlling the pace of the conversation, not being a passenger on the conversation, but being a driver. You're the teacher. That's called authority. Jesus' style was marked by authority, and the crowds marveled at him because of the authority with which he spoke. Okay? We also have authority because Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore you go. He's delegating authority to you. Authority. So that means you're in charge. You are the representative of the Word of God on the earth. So that means authority. But it doesn't mean, whose authority is it? Is it Pilate's authority? What is truth? Is it Caiaphas' authority? Better for one man to die. Or is it Jesus' authority? Gentleness. So authority with gentleness. Quiet, confident authority. That's what I want you to get into your mind as the how. Because we always focus on the what are we going to say, but the how we're going to say it in the Middle East is just as important, if not much more important. So how are you going to say it? Speak with authority, with gentleness. Okay? Take control of the conversation. But you're not some kind of a rude, or dry theologian. Humor, wordplay, puns, rapport. Be human with people. Middle Easterners, love humor. Humor is great. The thing about humor, it's very difficult to teach humor across cultures. It's very difficult to learn humor across cultures. Let me give you a funny insight. My brother Pierre, he was born in America. Well, just after we came to the United States, he was born. I was born in Lebanon. He is better than me in Arabic. He married an Arab woman, and he's living in Lebanon. His Arabic, he's really been working on his Arabic. He's really good in Arabic. But he's not funny in Arabic. In America, he's hilarious. He is like the funny guy. But in Lebanon, people just look at him like, why did you say that? That's stupid. Because the humor doesn't translate very well. For me, I'm not so funny anywhere I go. But one thing I notice, is that I really love Lebanese humor. In fact, one of the things that, almost as much as Lebanese food, the thing I really miss is laughing with my friends in Lebanon. Because it's different somehow. And it's like a hunger that I have that I don't get. But I believe that because of translation, we read the Bible not only in translation, but in translation of translation from the original verbal words of Jesus. I believe that we lose a lot of the humor because of that translation. And I think that Jesus was funny. because he loved people, people loved him. I might be wrong, but I think that's true. And the best evangelists that I've ever met have a good rapport with people. They have fun with people. And you don't have to be a joke teller to be able to have fun and enjoy people. And that's the context of sharing the gospel. It doesn't always have to be, look, this is really serious, let's talk about the Trinity. You know, these really difficult philosophical questions that Pascal and really big thinkers could not figure out. Let's talk this through. It can be fun. And I think that's part of Jesus' style. Mystery and not giving people easy answers, these are really important. Not answering questions. Or answering questions with questions. What do you think? How do you read it? You know, a lot of times people will give you the answer you want to hear. That's the part of human beings. So if you tell them the answer, what's part of you? What's the natural human thing to do in a conversation? Somebody makes a statement, you add a but, right? This is natural conversation. But let me modify. But if I ask you, you're going to tell me what I want to hear. So which one do you want them to say? But or what you want to hear? So you ask them. Often you'll be surprised, they'll tell you the truth. And then you can say, very good. And we went from fighting about this point over here all the way over here without any conflict. So asking those questions and not answering the questions, not being quick to answer the questions. I remember one time some of my relatives in Rahbi in Lebanon, very far up in the mountains, my dad's mom's village, they were having a big family crisis and conflict. Rahbi. In Akkar. You've been there? Why? You have a friend in Rahbi? That's weird. That's a small town. Anyway, so there was a family conflict, and they asked me my opinion. And I was like 17 or something. And I started to speak, and I was pausing, and I was like just came from America right to Rahbi, and my Arabic was still rusty. And I was trying to like think of the word that I was looking for and how to say what I wanted to say. And I just paused, you know, stopped for a minute and kind of collected my thoughts. And I began to speak very slowly. And honestly, I said something that I think was probably like, what's the wisdom of a 17-year-old boy, right? But they were like, you are so wise. And I remember thinking, the reason you think I'm wise is because I'm speaking slowly. I remember thinking, I thought that wasn't very wise. But if you speak slowly, you'll be thought wise. And the less you say, the more wise you seem. So this is my problem. And I have to always remember, slow down. Don't say everything on your mind. I usually start like I did with Sammy, I usually start talking before I formulated my thoughts about what I'm going to say. So, because I'll get there. But it's better to say less and to say, to speak slowly, okay? Okay, I'm going to jump ahead now. Stories. Wait, when's our break? When is our break?
3:30.
In 5 minutes.
8 minutes. No, it's okay. Okay, thank you. I'll do it. Before we get into the actual stories and how you can use any stories, but I have a few ideas for you. So I'll try to give you some examples and ideas of some stories to use. But I'll tell you another story first of a young man who came to Christ by listening to stories on the street of Beirut. His name is Abed. And Abed, I've told the story many times, and Abed is still on the journey. He's now married. But at the time when we met him, he was working as a male prostitute. He was about 16 or 17 years old. His father was dead. He's Palestinian by nationality. Which means he doesn't have a citizenship anywhere. Growing up in Lebanon in the refugee camps, his mother had kidney problems. She needed constant medical care, but she had no money. And there's not a lot of options for people like that. And he was the older of 3 children. The other 2 were much younger. And he was expected to support the family. And he found an opportunity as a prostitute. Lots of people come to Lebanon for prostitution from the whole Middle East because it's more criminalized in the countries where they come from. And including in that is a lot of people who visit male prostitutes. And so he was there to find business on the street. It's a known meeting place for all kinds of things. And he was there and he was walking around and he was well dressed and we had no idea what's going on in his life. Just to give you an idea, in one night he could make more money than a high school graduate, which he was not, could make in a month. And so he was able to support his family, but he was really...
Sir, you live in Lebanon now?
Huh?
You live in Lebanon?
No. He's in the Gulf. So he came and he heard us telling stories, and he stopped and he leaned on the railing against the sea and listened to us, and he never said a word, and he stayed there for 3 or 4 hours until we were ready to leave. And as we were ready to leave, he said, I want a Bible. He said, I know you're Christians. I can tell from how you're talking. Can you give me a Bible? We said, we don't have a full Bible, but we have a New Testament. We can give it to you. So we gave him a New Testament. He said, I want to see you again. He said, we're going to be here tomorrow night. You know, he had stayed from probably 6:30 until maybe 10 o'clock. And that's when we were leaving. Well, the next night we had told him we would be there, but we didn't get his number. There was a lot of people and things, and people were saying goodbye and so on. And the next night, Arkan and, you know Arkan? Zeki? Yeah, he and I were doing something, talking and whatever, and the time got away from us and we didn't go down like we said we were going to. And then we realized like about 10 o'clock, remember that guy Abed? He was going to wait for us. So we went down there and he was there. He'd been waiting there the whole evening. And we said, oh, did you read the book we gave you? He said, yeah, I read it. We said, which part did you read? He said, I read the whole thing. And he'd read the whole New Testament, that 24-hour period. And then some of our friends showed up and we started talking, and Arkan started telling a story. And I was standing there and Abed was like over there, leaning against the railing. And somebody came up, just somebody from the street came up, stood next to him and said, Shuhada, what's this? Who are these people? And this guy, Abed said, you see these two? He pointed to me and Arkan. He said, they're fishermen. See, here's the sea, and people come with their poles to fish, right? So he said, they're fishermen. He said, they catch fish, and the small ones, they throw them back, and the big ones, they take them home. Can you believe that? He was speaking in symbolism, in the language of symbolism and stories from the Bible. He read the Bible and he picked up quickly on the symbol of the fishers of men, and he recognized that we were doing that. And he gave this guy an answer which was true metaphorically, but was basically not true, you know, literally, right? So this is the sense in which you got to be truthful. Is, you know, I'm not saying lie, but this answer is a very clever answer. And the guy, because the background I forgot to tell you, Abed said, I want to ask you questions about these things. And we said, afterwards, you can come to our house and ask questions. So that's when he was thinking, when they said the bad ones they throw back, and the good ones, they take them home. And but this guy who he wasn't interested. He was just a guy. He was out for a walk. He didn't have a spiritual hunger. He looked at us, he said, okay, and he walked away. We're not fishermen. What kind of fishermen do that? But he accepted this answer on its face, and he wasn't curious. And so let him go. That's the kind of fish we need to throw back. Okay, this is part of how stories function. Let's take our break. And yes, sir. Yes, let's do questions.
Well, when you say stories, I mean, I understand we want to share the gospel, but do you make stories out of things that have happened in your life, or do you try to take biblical stories and make a story those for the first sharing the gospel? Do you do both?
We do those, but what I'm talking about is parables, and we make our own parables. We use biblical parables. We could use stories from our own lives, but you'll see here after the break, some of them are parables that are just made up, that we've made up. Some of them are adaptations or retelling the story of one of the parables of Jesus, which is a lot of fun. You can kind of take a parable of Jesus and reset it in the modern context, and you keep the meaning or part of it. And each one may have layers of meaning. I was thinking about this actually today. My boys, my son Elias came with me because I had to finish baling some hay. And he loves to sit with me on the tractor when I'm baling hay, and we talk. And he was telling me all about this movie, this show that he's into, which is called How to Train Your Dragon. Has anybody heard about it? Well, in this world, there are Vikings and there are dragons, and the Vikings used to fight the dragons, and now they learned how to tame the dragons, and now the dragons and the Vikings work together, but not all of them, because some of them still... And I was thinking about how much this child, my son, is picking up from this program that is on the subtext level, right? So in this show, all the old Vikings, all the old men Vikings, like all the fathers, they're these big, hefty guys, and they just want to kill the dragons. And then all the sons are all kind of effeminate, like children that are like, this is the 17-year-old boy, and this is the father. But they're the ones that want to make peace with the dragons and train the dragons, and the dads are just stupid, big, old, violent Vikings, right? So just the setting of this story has a message. And the message subverts the idea of parental, the stupid old dad, kind of. This idea comes in there. And I think about that, and we get bombarded with these pictures. And it also presents this idea of the next generation is enlightened, and the old generation is foolish. And so this message is permeating all of culture. So these messages, this is what I'm talking about. Can we create stories that the context of the story itself is a message? And this is what, like when you talk about a judge or, the unjust judge or the friend at midnight, there's a context in which the meaning is carried. It's showing, but not telling necessarily. And in some ways, it's more subversive, it's more powerful than telling. In other words, if there was a show that my kids were watching that said, hey, your mom and dad, they're stupid idiots. It's you kids that know, what's good. First of all, I wouldn't let them watch it. Secondly, they might not like it because they would know, hey, no, my dad maybe not a stupid idiot. This show is mean, right? But if you put it in this level, it sneaks in. And in a way, we're sneaking the truth in, right? You still have to let it in, right? But in a way, it's kind of sneaking. And that's maybe puts it a little bit... It's not dishonest. It doesn't need to be dishonest. But what I'm talking about is showing the truth, not just telling the truth, if that makes sense in some way. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
When you go out in the street, you just stand on the corner and just start yelling out stories, or what do you do?
Well, what we would usually do is we would start just by worshiping God, you know? And we literally pull up a chair or a trash can or something to sit on a railing and have a drbeki and an oud or a guitar, and we start worshiping just 2 or 3 people. And usually people gather. Because it's like, in America, you go down to Pearl Street, you pull out a guitar, you're just another bum. But in the Middle East, it's different, it's interesting, especially if you do it. If you do it, you're going to gather a crowd, because this is really interesting, because you're blonde. If you didn't know. Yeah. A lot of missionaries try to blend in. And it's kind of silly because 1, you're not going to, and 2, you're giving up your big advantage, which is you're different. And people want to see something different. They want to, you know. Yeah. So anyway. Other questions? So, okay, so once the crowd is kind of gathered, then we say, can we tell you a story? And then we begin. Okay, 15 minutes. Come back at 11:45. 10 minutes. 11 minutes, 11:45.